Welcome to our webinar. My name is Paul Andrews. I'm the General Manager for the Skills Checkpoint program here at Busy at Work. Skills Checkpoint is a great program for those that are 45 to 70 looking to upgrade their skills. If we get an opportunity, we'll talk a little more about that program later on. I'd like to introduce Rebecca Muldoon. Rebecca is with a trans Tasman consultancy called Partners in Change.
That's it.
And they specialise in age and work and helping organisations deal with skills shortages.
That's
Rebecca herself has been in this game for about 20 years.
Not that I look like it, Paul, but yes.
Helping people and organisations reach their potential through skills. Some housekeeping before we kind of get into the program. For those of you that are on the web, on the left-hand side of the screen, there's a chat box. You can insert questions there. If you're watching on Facebook and Twitter, you can leave a comment. Love to get those questions, love to hear from you so that we can kind of make the program as useful as we can for you, because that's the purpose, maximising the value of the time. Now, I guess getting into the program, the background, you'll have seen that we referenced a Deloitte report that talked about 29 million skills shortage. It's a kind of a different way of thinking about skills shortages, not kind of concentrating on the people, I guess, but saying that everybody has got some degree of shortages of their skills, and there's a lot of drivers of that change that they talked about, those skills shortages, and we'll talk about some of those drivers today, the demographic drivers and some of the technological drivers and so on that have led to this skills shortage. But I know it's no news to you if you're a manager, or if you're a HR manager, or if you're a leader in organisations, you're dealing with skills shortages all the day. It concerns all of us. So we're going to concentrate on, I guess, on some of those, talk a bit about the drivers, but also, most importantly, talk about what we can do about it.
Absolutely.
So we're looking forward to hearing from you, Rebecca.
Thank you very much, Paul, for that warm welcome. Great to be here with you all today, folks. Thank you for making the time out to talk about this very important topic, and please, we're welcoming of your questions. Make them as hard as possible. Okay, so we're going to run through what we're calling the perfect storm, and that's the confluence of factors that are coming together which create for businesses this skills shortage, one that we've never seen before. Okay. We're going to talk about what this means for employers in terms of the top 3 risks that we see are coming up, and I'm sure these are going to start resonating with you as we go through them. And finally, we're going to look at what you can do. We're going to get really practical, and we're going to look at what you can do as an employer, as a leader, to actually manage these risks that you're experiencing and facing right now. So let's get started. This first slide shows us a 5,000-year view of the population, and it basically says to us, look, right back in the Stone Age, people only lived to about 20 years of age. So early adulthood and life was then over. It wasn't until 1500 till around 1800 that life expectancy started to really increase rapidly. So for thousands and thousands of years, people died early. Come around this 15 to 1800, people started to live to 30 to 40 years of age. Life was really tough, and in fact I've got a little quote here from Thomas Hobbes, who was a 17th century British philosopher, and he described that time as solitary, poor, nasty, brutish and short. So
thankfully, by the sound of it.
Not a very nice time to be living in. From about 1880 onwards, life expectancy at birth doubled, so from 40 to 80, and in the period of 10 short generations, we're now living well into our 80s.
Okay.
And it's being driven, of course, by medical advances and improvements in lifestyle. So let's take a look at this next slide, which gives us much more contemporary information about what's happening with our life expectancy. Australians, and we're very fortunate to live in this country. It's long been called the lucky country, and life expectancy has continued to grow for Australians. Quality of life continues to be on the rise, living conditions are improving, and we've had major advancements in a whole lot of sectors, particularly health and housing. The government data is showing us that the lifespan for both sexes has increased, and people born these days are living 33 to 34 years longer than they did back in those 1880s that we spoke about before. Life expectancy for you and me, Paul, 82.5 years, which is higher than the OECD average. Now, interesting and important to note that these stats only relate to non-Indigenous Australians. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are expected to live a less lifespan, a shorter lifespan, 9 years for men and 8 years for women. So still some catching up there to do. The interesting thing is that the longer we live, the longer we are likely to live. Does that surprise you?
Yeah, I'm not sure I get that.
Yeah.
What's the drive?
How can that be? Surely you're closer to death, right? The older you are. But the National Centre of Health Studies in the US has found that the greater the age you are today, the greater the age you are likely to reach. Okay, do you want to know why?
Yeah.
Okay, it's as simple as this. All of those mortal dangers that we're faced with as younger people, as children and younger people, older people have dodged all of those. So things like bad genetics, disease, automobile crashes, infant death, all of those things that cause death in those early years, you've survived all of those, so likely that you're going to keep living. So my granddad's 95 and he's fit and strong, doing really well, and I just wonder at 95, how much more he plans to live, because the longer you live, the longer you live.
Okay, we're living longer.
Yeah.
Okay.
So at 60, you could have another 25 to 30 years of living. And the question then is how are people going to be using these additional years that they've been gifted? Many of them will want to remain in work. Many of them will need to remain in work, and workplaces are going to need those people in work. All right, the second factor contributing to the perfect storm is declining birth rates. So smaller and smaller families. Birth rates have significantly dropped since 60 years ago. 60 years ago, at the peak in the baby boom, we were having 3.5 births per 100 females. And we've had a massive decline over the last 6 decades. Marked around the 60s and 70s, you can see on the graph there a very steep decline, and that's about oral contraception.
Okay.
Where women have a choice about whether they want to be having babies, and it's about an increase of women in the labour market. So there's been less babies being born. There's a nice little positive blip there around the 2007 mark. You can see it on the end of the graph. What do you think that was about?
Baby bonus.
Baby bonus, that's right.
Okay.
The flat screen TV bonus had an impact on fertility. So currently in Australia, 1.27 is our fertility rate, and that's concerning because it's well below the birth replacement rate of 2.1.
Okay,
yep.
2.1.
That's right. Everyone's got to have 2.1 babies,
Okay.
all women. Okay, so it's projected to drop in 20 years' time to only 1.07 births per 100.
Okay, it's a long way.
Long way from our replacement rate. So that the projection is that keeps actually getting lower.
Okay.
All right. So the third thing that's going on then is
those characteristics, what's their impact on skills shortages?
I'm so glad that you're asking that. It's a great question. Well, fundamentally, it's about the numbers of people coming through who can become skilled workers.
Okay.
So this graph depicts that question perfectly. Take a look at this. When you look at this graph, you can see that the orange part of the graph, though the population between 15 and 64, and that's our current workforce predominantly. And the graph shows us that over the years and into the future, that proportion of the population is shrinking. It's continuing to reduce. Similarly, our children and young people, 0 to 14, that's also a percentage, a proportion of people that are continuing to decline. And the problem here is that is where our future and our current workforce are coming from.
Okay.
Yeah. So looking at the top end of the graph, though, we've got a growing area of green and light blue, and these are our 65s and overs. So that proportion of the population is growing. So
and the good news is, I guess, that they're potentially useful in terms of the skills shortage. It's kind of part of the solution.
Absolutely.
Okay.
A very big part of the solution.
Okay.
Well picked up. So one might think that our unemployment rate points to there being plenty of available labour. You know, we hear all the time in the media that unemployment, underemployment is big in Australia. We think there's a lot of slack in the labour market and it should be easy to recruit. Well, the issue is the difficulty in finding suitable labour. So many of you would have experienced when you advertise for a position, you might get a lot of applicants and you're thinking, great, this is fantastic. However, when you look through them, finding a suitable candidate might be more like looking for a needle in a haystack. And what businesses are reporting is that there's a deficit of workers with the right skills to match employers' needs. So the other challenge, I guess, is that we know that the skills in our workforces now, what we need to run our businesses is constantly changing. And the skills that we need now are going to actually be different to the ones we're going to need in the future. So potentially, this challenge of skill shortage is going to continue to worsen.
Okay.
All right, the last factor that's contributing to this perfect storm of skills shortage is about people staying on. And as you pointed to before, Paul, this is actually our saving grace.
Okay.
That traditionally people around 60, 65 would head off to retire. People are actually staying on longer in work. They're staying on either through choice, they want to, they find meaning and value in work. They are staying on because of necessity. For many people, their funds don't allow them to fund their retirement for 20, 30 plus years of retirement. Some people sadly stay on due to fear and fears about the unknown. You know, what would my life look like? What would I do in this time of not working?
We've seen some changes to pension age, and
Yeah.
I notice our skills checkpoint program, point in case, it's the age of that program
Yes.
supports people from 45 to 70, not 45 to 60, as it might have done 10 years ago. So
Absolutely.
the world is changing in that respect.
It's great that policy is recognising that, isn't it? It's a fantastic program.
Yeah.
Great. So, people are starting to put their lives together differently than how perhaps our parents did or our grandparents did. The traditional construct of 20, 40, 10 is being thrown out the window. So that was, in the time when it was normal to have 20 years of education, 40 years of work, and then 10 years of retirement, living that golden dream before you went off and quietly snuffed it.
I just had a question from Michelle,
Yeah.
who was kind of recognising, I guess, that older people for necessity or want to stay in the workforce.
Yep.
Does the jobs suit older people these days? So she may have been thinking about the technological challenges, and she may have been thinking about how, physically, whether or not they can continue.
Yep.
What's been your experience in dealing with organisations and people in that respect?
It's a great question, Michelle. Thank you very much for asking us that question. Look, I guess the long and the short of it is that people need to be lifelong learners. For any of us, regardless of what age we are, we're going to need to continue to upskill, stay abreast of current themes, challenges, needs in the workplace in order for us to be relevant. So for older workers, that's particularly the case. And with the changes in technology, we're not the technology natives that are coming through in the early generations today. And it's something that we need to continually be mindful of upskilling in. And that's all it is. It's about training, development, learning and skilling.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so the thing is with this longevity is that because people are living, 30 to 35 years longer, it's created a whole new life stage for people, almost like a second adulthood. And people are really starting to wonder, and to play with how they put their lives together. Okay. Do you remember the surprise years ago, 10, 15 years ago, when people left grade 12, a lot of those school leavers were starting to take that gap year? I mean, I remember myself thinking, are they crazy? Just get on with it. What do you mean, a gap year? Get on with your life. And now I've started to see my niece is doing it right now, and she's loving it, and she's grown so much, and she's ready for university next year. And I think that people are starting to intersperse some of that longevity bonus right through their life. We're seeing people mid-career deciding, you know what, I've always wanted to be a nurse, going off and retraining and becoming a nurse mid-career. At a point in time when previously you might have thought, I've only got 10 more years of work, why bother?
Yes.
Yep. Some of our best...
Sorry,
I've got another one.
I had a comment from Stephen saying he's 60 and he's thinking of having a gap year for the next year or two. So I guess there's plenty of us. I'm reflecting on that myself. So it's,
right.
I think it's a good way of thinking about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's part of the solution that employers can work on with their employees. This concept of retirement not being a drop dead point in time, but perhaps being something more like a pathway or a transition.
It's a very different kind of conversation, isn't it? It's a very different kind of way of thinking about it, that people might actually go off and come back.
Yes. Definitely. And then, of course, the other thing that we need to be thinking of as employers, as leaders, is that people might still be very committed to working, but they might be wanting to have a change in how they're putting their work and life together. So often our older workers are in that what we're calling the sandwich generation, in that they might have caring responsibilities for their parents or their grandparents, as I do, or they might have caring responsibilities for their children or even their grandchildren. And so for them it mightn't be a matter of I want to give up work. It's a matter of I can't juggle all this in the way I need to, and I'm going to need some solutions, some flexibility potentially in order to allow me to stay on. When we talk to people at Partners in Change, we try to avoid using the term retirement. And it's because we're realising that for more and more people, retirement's becoming one of those outdated terms, outdated concepts. And it brings up for some people the notion of you've been put out to pasture. You're on the scrap heap, you're retired now. So for some people, they very much aspire to retirement, and that's great. But for more and more people, that's actually not the case. And so we're trying to suggest to you as employers to drop that from your language when you start talking to your employees about that, what they want to do.
So what do we do?
What do we do? Okay, well, before we get to the what are we going to do, I'm going to summarise for you what this all means in terms of business risks. So what we've got here for most businesses, and see which ones are resonating for you, is a loss of skilled workers. We do have people being retiring, they're leaving. We have people being poached. Your skilled workers are obviously the most vulnerable to be poached because they're attractive to other employers. And skills redundancy, unless there's a culture and an individual mindset of ongoing skills development, your skills can very quickly be outdated and become redundant, and consequently so do we.
Yeah, so in a high skill shortage environment, poaching becomes kind of much more an issue for organisations. We often hear organisations resisting kind of taking on apprentices, for example, because they're concerned about poaching or they have that experience. What can you do about that kind of stuff in your experience? What do you say to organisations in terms of that issue?
I think it boils down to make yourself attractive. Make your people want to stay through creating the climate where they feel valued, where they feel they're getting opportunities, where they're being suitably rewarded and acknowledged. Certainly, creating that sense of commitment comes through having leaders who manage their people well. And we'll talk a bit more about that in a minute.
Yeah, and we often say to organisations too, say, well, what do I do if I train somebody and they leave? And we think, well, yeah, what do you do if you don't train somebody? You know, that's kind of the it's the worst problem in a way, because you've got the lack of skill in your workforce. Yeah.
You know, often though, if you've been a great employer and a person has left you, there's a potential that they'll come back to you at some other point. You know, so they're not lost to you completely. Potentially they will come back. And Paul, you know, you would know this all too well, that people don't leave organisations, they leave their managers, they leave their leaders. And so that's really the nub of what employers can do to try and combat the risk of losing your skilled workers due to poaching.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, let's look at the second one. The second big business risk is a loss of knowledge. And this is the stuff people know. Of course, it's the technical knowledge as well, but it's more the stuff people know that comes through, you know, years of working in a business, getting to know your clients and your suppliers and the way to get things done. That's really a very big risk. So the loss of knowledge. So again, it's about, you know, how do we keep people? How do we retain them? So we retain their knowledge.
So question from Aaron.
Yes.
We've talked about retirement. What about the new people coming on? What are the kind of risks for them as well? Do the same kind of things apply for organisations in terms of the...
Well, I guess when a new person comes on, there's probably more excitement about joining an organisation for the first time, and they're in a rapid period of learning, aren't they? And so I think the things that matter to people are still the same. You know, more and more, regardless of age, people are looking for flexibility in their work. You know, they're wanting to actually mix it up a little and not have that standard 9-to-5 job, you know, sort of 52 weeks of the year, 48 weeks of the year, and so we really need to mix it up a bit.
And Claire's asked a question about your comment before about bad managers and what can we do to stop staff leaving from bad managers, and I know that's a kind of a complex.
It's a great question. It's at the heart of it, isn't it, that question? And it's a very big question. But I would say it comes down to the competency of your managers. You know, that they have the skills and the desire to want to lead their people. And if you can invest in your managers and upskill in that area, you're likely to have better relationships between your managers and your staff. Your staff are going to be more engaged, and they'll work harder for you. Yeah.
And I think, Claire, too, it's often about understanding or knowing who your bad managers are. And that's kind of one of the things that I think organisations struggle with, is having an understanding of where those, you know, where those points are. And how strategic they are too.
Definitely.
So some managers kind of have a bigger impact on your business than others.
Absolutely. And you think about how your managers came to be in the roles that they're in. Some managers end up there because they've been in the business a long time, so there's a seniority thing that's happened. Other managers have ended up there because they've got great technical skills. That doesn't necessarily make them good leaders. So, you know, I don't subscribe to the belief that leaders are born. I believe that leaders are made, and that we can definitely look at upskilling our managers, giving them the tools, helping them to be reflective, emotional intelligence, all of those things that can help them relate better to their people and lead their people better. So I want to give you a quick stat here in relation to the cost of disengagement. Here in Australia and New Zealand, this is going to blow your mind. The cost of disengaged employees is estimated to be $70 billion a year. That's the annual economic cost of disengaged employees. So these are your folks who are turning up to work, occupying positions, you're paying their wage, but overall, across the two countries, they are an economic drain. So that's a real sweet spot that businesses can work on if you're wanting to look at improving productivity, is to look at improving engagement.
Okay.
All right.
So just got a question from Tony. She says, what's that number made up of? Where do you get that kind of number? from
Yeah.
disengagement? How do you kind of measure it?
How do you come up with that?
It's, yeah.
A lot of businesses now will do surveys, to measure the pulse. You can do that as an app, you can do it as an annual survey, but really if you think about the costs of disengagement, it's about the fact that somebody is occupying a seat and they're not producing in the way that you need them to. So that's the cost. In terms of that statistic, if you're interested, I can give you the source for that, Tony. But this is what I'm quoting for you today.
Yeah. So it's sort of the cost of people who are being less productive than they would otherwise have been. And it kind of
absolutely.
And they've got the skills necessarily, but it's the application of them.
Yeah.
So it's not so much in that case skills shortage. It's skills. It's the application of them in a. Okay.
Absolutely, and this stuff's contagious in your workplace.
Yeah.
So disengaged workers pull down the productivity of others around them. So they increase the churn. People don't want to be around negative people. They increase churn and they generally darken the morale of people around them. So these are the folks that instead of applying themselves to solving a problem, will actually stand at the water cooler and tell the 3 people who come by about how rubbish this decision was, or that project was, or what happened was.
Yes,
and so
it's contagious.
It's very contagious, yeah. So they're the 3 business risks. You've got the lack of skilled workers, you've got the loss of knowledge, and the loss of productivity.
Yeah.
I hear you saying, what can we do about this?
Yeah.
Okay, there are things you can do, and the great news is that they're not all expensive. Some of them you can start straight away. So this is what we encourage you to think about. Firstly, you need to understand your risk. Every business will be slightly different. Every industry is different. So understand your risks and think about 2 questions. This will help you get to the bottom of it. The first one is, how many of your staff are in mission critical roles or in single point dependency roles? So those people that you really, really rely on in your business, how many? And who are they? And the second thing is, what would happen if they left?
Okay.
Think about the implications for your business if they left, or even worse, if they stayed and they stayed on disengaged. So understand your risks.
Okay. Yeah. So I've often heard that. I've heard that kind of expressed as, what's the can't buy knowledge. So what's the knowledge I kind of can't get from the marketplace, in a sense.
Absolutely.
So try and identify those kind of knowledge risks. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
So what would happen if they left? Can you buy them or can you not? And how long would it take to bring somebody up to speed?
Indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially with all that tacit knowledge we spoke about.
Yeah.
Okay, so talk to your people. This is critical, folks. Really, I urge you to suspend second guessing or assuming what the intentions are of your workers, particularly your older workers. Think about how people are putting their lives together differently, and don't make the assumption that because they're a certain age that they're going to be looking to retire. Recently, I had the opportunity to talk to a HR person in a large organisation, and I asked this person, do your managers know the intentions of their staff? And she said, not really, no, I wouldn't think so. Oh, there is one leader though who does, she told me. And I had this little skip of excitement. I was quite delighted to hear that. And I said, oh, that's fantastic. So has this manager talked to their staff? Is that how they know their intention? And she said to me, oh, no, it's not that. It's just that they have a good relationship with their people, and based on the age of the people, they assume that they probably, they know their intentions moving forward. And I said to her, that sounds like a bit of a risk to me, that they're making the assumption based on a person's age about what they're intending to do with their work.
Be an interesting conversation to have. It'd be an unusual one, I think, in many workplaces to start talking about, you're thinking of, well, I can't use the word retire.
No.
What are you thinking of? What's your 5-year plan, that kind of stuff, so we can start thinking about, because that in a way, it could be a threatening conversation or might be perceived as such. And,
Absolutely.
So it's one of those challenging conversations. It's not so much about performance, it's about intention. That's different.
That's right. And there's a whole new language that we need to come to grips with in order to have these conversations in a way that doesn't get us in trouble with HR, that doesn't upset our staff, our employee.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And again, it's about the capability to have those conversations.
Absolutely. Much like in organisations, especially the large ones, have invested in their people, learning how to have those performance conversations in an effective way. So we now need to be learning how to have these, what we call staying on conversations with people.
Yep.
And we're finding more and more that managers just don't have the confidence or the skills
or the
to have
language,
these.
probably.
The language.
Just to have that conversation.
Absolutely. So think about that in terms of an opportunity to upskill your people to have these conversations. And these conversations can be at anybody at any age. They don't have to just be restricted to your older workers. What's your intention? 30-year-old. You might hear that they'd like to have that year off and go overseas. Well, would you rather they resign because they don't think that they can come back, or would you rather look at negotiating a period of time when they can perhaps do this and then come back to you? Yep. The key in the conversation is find out what would make a difference to your people. Often, if we give people the opportunity, they can come up with solutions to their own problems. So managers will often express concern that if they open up this can of worms about, what does a person want to do in the future, that they're going to be constricted by the policies in their organisation, or worse than that, they'll set a precedent. So if they say yes, then they'll set a precedent. So find out, talk to your people. There's a really great piece of work done by Narrabri City Council. They've put a great little YouTube out there called The Challenge That Won't Go Away, and they talk about the conversations that they've had in their workplace and the great practical solutions they've come up to things like manual workers in the outdoor field, not wanting to be out there in the harsh conditions anymore. So check out that video.
It's an interesting lead into the skills checkpoint program, which kind of helps people transition from what their current skill set is to a new one, and that sounds like the demographics are going to push us more that way. So we've talked a lot about retention, and we've talked about retention of kind of skills, workforce, particularly we've talked about maturing workforce. I guess our other options are buying, and we've talked about that's a tough market these days to kind of buy skills, but naturally that's an option for us. And I guess the other option we've got is build our own.
Build your own skills. That's right. The thing is, this is a challenge that's not going to go away. So the key message for you is take action. Understand your risks. Talk with your people and take action. There's some really practical things that can be done. One of the big ones is about creating that age-inclusive workplace, thinking about how you can get multi-generations working effectively together. You have the younger people coming through with new knowledge and talent and skills, and you have your more experienced workers who've got a wealth that they can bring in. Let's get that melting pot mixing together. It's
kind of using the retention to build.
Absolutely. So the other thing you can do is think about how you can embrace more flexibility in your workplace. We know that that's something that's really appealing to employees. So if you want to attract people to your organisation and retain them, allow them to live their life in the way that works for them and can work for you.
I've just had a question from Leanne asking us about small business. And she's saying, well, we can't really give our staff a gap year, if that's what they want to do, because I guess, if you've only got half a dozen staff, one person leaving you is a big deal, and you'd replace them, I guess. So what do you advise small businesses?
It is certainly harder as a small business to absorb that kind of loss or to have the flexibility. The thing is, though, you do that already when people go on maternity leave. So somehow you find a way to bridge that time when people have gone on maternity leave. And if you've done that well and you've treated them well, more often than not, those people will come back to work with you after they've had their baby and they've had their time off.
Okay.
Same can be said for people who are wanting that time off to travel or explore something new. It's about thinking about the bigger picture.
Okay.
Yes, it's inconvenient, absolutely. However, what are your options? Do you let that person who's got all the knowledge and the skills that you need go forever, or do you try to find a way to accommodate that and have them come back to you?
Okay.
So there is no easy answer. It's about talking together with your employee and trying to find a way to make it work for you both. So the challenge is that we can't just move people on anymore. The reality is that there's no one coming in behind them.
Okay.
So going back...
well, that's stark.
Stark,
but best
really.
we know.
But I'm sure that you're experiencing that. So
Okay.
just looking then at this quote, I want to reference Deloitte's before we finish off today, their latest report, and they have said the best way to avoid skill shortages in the future will be to flip the numbers, start spending more on training, and we've added prioritise retention instead of recruitment. Because as skill shortages worsen, the cost of recruitment will only grow.
Yeah, recruitment and skill building, absolutely. I get that. Okay.
Absolutely. So think about your staying on message. Think about how you can work harder on retention and how you can invite people into the conversation and communicate that message of we want you to stay on, but we want you to stay engaged and productive, and how can we do that together?
Okay. Thank you so much for all your insights today, Rebecca. That's a kind of an interesting way of dealing with the skills shortage. It flips it a little and kind of says, well, concentrate on that retention piece and concentrate on your manager's skill set because there's a storm coming. Thanks all of you for watching today, and especially those of you who asked some really great questions. We've very much appreciated that. That sharpened our presentation, I'm sure made it much more useful for all of us. Look, we'll be sending out the recorded version of this presentation and we'll also be sending out some additional information on the Skills Checkpoint for Older Workers program, which offers career support for those 45 to 70. So thanks very much for your time today. I hope you've benefited from the webinar. Thank you.
Thanks everybody. Bye.